Okay, hello guys, and welcome back to Relevant Founders, brought to you by Relevant Software. Relevant is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers world-class standard products for Fortune 500 companies and promising startups. So today, guys, on the show, we've got Santeri, CTO from CUJO AI. Santeri, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Matthew?
Very good, thank you. Very, very good. Right, so before we start with our Blitz round, what I want to know is, just in a nutshell, how would you explain CUJO AI?
Well, AI, we enable network operators globally to improve the digital life protection of their consumers in and outside of their home by deploying solutions to the consumer and SMB home gateways and also providing app experience for that.
Nice. Right, Blitz round, 10 questions. If you know the answers, great. If you don't, no problem at all. We'll move on to the next one. Okay, so first of all, how did you come up with the company name? How was the company name built?
Joe is inspired from the famous Stephen King's novel. It's the dog, it's the protector. So I suppose that's where it came from originally.
How long did it take the team at CUJO to find the initial funding? Do you know?
Well, the original inventor of the idea and the business, it comes to the friends and partner network, basically. So the initial funding came from very close by, people who have worked together before in earlier startups. That's where it started from. But as it happened on the first year, CUJO went to Indiegogo crowdfunding round and reached 760% of its original goal in that funding. So some crowdfunding was also used in the very beginning.
How did you find your first customers?
Well, we started from business to consumer, offering this cute home smart firewall. And that was at 2016. But it was direct to consumers. And then, well, today we don't do any of that. We kind of, we got name. We won several awards from telcos and from analysts, got to World Economic Forum as an innovator member, and that captured the attention from the network service providers that actually wanted to have similar capabilities in the routers that they ship with their connections. And then we transitioned to what we do today.
What is the biggest lesson you have learned from working at CUJO AI so far?
Well, I'm a CTO coming from the kind of technology side of things, but I think the biggest lesson is not there. I think the biggest lesson is that startups, they need to have the importance of storytelling. So every startup, they nearly need like that, spin doctor on its transition point of the journey where the story is really well suited for the audience and for the problem.
Why is now of all times the time CUJO AI to exist?
Well, there's huge growth of devices at consumer homes, over 20 devices in an average US household. And this growth of IoT devices, a computer for everything from a doorbell to a fridge. So that's one part of it. Our homes start looking like the SMB networks early 2000. And when you look at the number of devices, number of Linux boxes running in your home, and then the still growing cybersecurity problem and the attention that the cybercriminals have paid attention to what we have at homes. It needs to be protected. So endpoint protection covers only so much and leaves so much fertile ground for maldoing in our home. And this kind of onion model of protection which we have seen in enterprises, is now finally reaching our homes. The network needs to be also protected.
Tell me, so you said, okay, so up to or around average 20 devices in a household now.
It's over 20.
Over 20. Wow. Amazing. I mean, I wouldn't even think that, if I'm honest. What would you be doing now if you weren't in this position at CUJO AI? Would you still be working in tech? Would you be doing the same kind of thing elsewhere, do you think?
Absolutely. Well, personally, I've been on the cybersecurity for my whole career, probably steering and building some other startup company from the first invention to growth.
How big is your team right now? How big is your team?
It's depends how we count, 170 people in the company.
100.
170.
Nice. Describe your journey so far. I believe you started at CUJO in 2018, if I'm correct. Describe your journey since then in, as little as one word as possible.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that it's a bit of a roller coaster, but I think this is more like a moonshot. So there have been, of course, ups and downs, but it's been going nicely.
Yes. Okay. And describe this year in 1 year. COVID is gone. Well, it's still around, but at least we're adapting to it a lot more now. Describe this year, CUJO.
Well, it's absolutely nice to see people again, of course. But from where the company stands, I think this is the year of pragmatic would be probably the right word. We kind of are already 7 years old. We're already 7 years in business since the start. We're getting sober, more down to the earth, practical. I think a lot of the cleanup is done, startup phase and different phases, which we have gone through. At least I would say 4 different phases, leave quite a bit of things to handle. I think it's getting down to the earth. So if I think about it, 2015, the startup was born. 2016, like a bit over 12 months after that, we released the first product. And 2018, we released a kind of a plan and the first POC for network service providers. Got it live, kind of 1.5 years later in massive production with one of the biggest Western world carriers. And after that, we have been scaling the platform. So we have like about 50 million homes using the solution now. And we have been adapting the solution all the way. So we kind of see that the company has got, now we're on the 4th phase as a company already. And we've done a kind of a one bigger pivot, which is going from consumers to the network service providers. So yeah, I think it's a year of pragmatism and also getting down to the practical. When you go from direct consumer business as a startup to sell the world's largest network service providers, the demands of the customer change quite a bit. We're suddenly forced to comply to standards like ISO 9001, 27001, business continuity, SOC 2 Type 2, and these standards kind of force the company to, from within, change quite a bit because they are, of course, also audited by the standard, by the different organizations that audit the standards. And it kind of have to come real from every layer of the company. Well, it started gradually when we started approaching network service providers 2018, and I've been here for that whole time, working also with them before for more than a decade in the ISP and network service provider. It happens gradually. You start contracting with network service providers. They have a rather strict requirements for their suppliers, which you need to comply to before you go to production or with any of the services. So I think it's been for them, and the demands grow. We started from the US-based carriers, and now we are working with the European-based carriers. We come to Europe, all the GDPR things you have to be compliant with, and the requirements just grow year by year when you're kind of growing in that space. Different network service providers have a different set of requirements, and it's just easier for us to actually standardize from within and provide certificates than to go to audits with every single one of them.
Tell me, let's have a look a little bit more into the challenges which you faced. Yeah. So obviously you've spoken about the challenges of obviously adapting to the situation, the technological changes, to the kind of how quick you are advancing as well. But tell me off the top of your head, what has been the biggest tech challenge which you faced since being there?
When you launch a service and you have a live customer and you have gone out with a version of the service that is not yet perfect for the next step of scale or product advancement, you are kind of in a situation that you have got your runway is over, you are up in the air and you're kind of operating at 747 and you have to fix it while you're flying, which means that you have all the time the production and you have the load, and then you need to do big changes in the architecture. That's probably the most laborsome challenge there, because then you need to cover all the corners. If the upgrade doesn't go right, you need to change the data models, you need to migrate. Migration is always a swear word in engineering, migrating data or data models. That's probably been the biggest challenge that we have faced, because we have been all the time working against clock, because we have seen a nice growth. So I think the learning from there would be like, build it for scale very early on. In our case, we were lucky the scale came on early from business perspective, but of course for engineering it puts a different challenge. The other challenge is, of course, when it comes to AI and machine learning, it's not kind of a one-trick pony. It's not like a sledgehammer, throw AI on it and it resolves everything. Not at all. It's always the false positives and negatives problem. It doesn't matter if we're trying to detect a device or malicious website or malicious behavior on a device. You have always that noise that is not accurate. And when you are at scale, even though you have a less than a percentage of a problem, it presents tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of cases out there. So you need to get accurate. So that's probably the second biggest thing, how you get to the desired accuracy at scale.
Tell me a little bit about what is AI governance and how it's being utilized at CUJO AI.
Yeah, we'll be working on that in also part of the World Economic Forum, where we have been defining the governance. First of all, in our productions, we have quite a bit of data. First of all, we have a clear segregation of who first of all can access production and how we run the algorithms in production. And then we have our research part, where when we have data at research, it's actually normalized. We don't know whose data we're actually processing when we're working on the research side in our environments. So we're governed by the segregation of our network service providers, which have to follow national laws and so forth. So that's one piece. Then we do have a steering groups, a bit of a bureaucracy there, of course, but we have architecture steering, which actually decides what are we going to apply AI for. So we know what our data scientists, data engineers are working on. And then, of course, I think the ISO standard 27001 or GDPR, which is kind of derivative of that, who has access to what and why and who approved it. When we're complying to that, we know who's actually entitled to do what. So it's a kind of an intersection and combination of compliance and technical governance that brings, I think we can be pretty transparent on how we're doing things here.
And so earlier you spoke about IoT, and you gave a little brief description of what IoT is. Our podcast has from engineers to founders to CEOs, all different listeners. Tell me a quick, real quick brief of what is IoT, just for our listeners, so they can all understand if they don't. And also, what threats is IoT proposing in the future?
Yeah, like Internet of Things. Well, we consider Internet of Things anything that is not a device that a human being uses directly with a user interface. So not a phone, not a tablet, not a PC, not running a browser. So it's any device that sits there on its own and does something for you, or a device that today has a computer running it. It used to do things for you, but now it's capable of talking to you through the internet, like your washing machine, which is a kind of a silly use case. I have a washing machine that has an IoT device running on it. Never used it though. I know when it's done, it beeps, and I have to go there to empty it anyway. But they are put to many places. So webcams, doorbells, any media device, any appliance that you have at home that runs computer on it to be able to talk. Even we do consider printers and TVs to a certain extent to IoT devices, even though we have a very granular classification of device families, types, and so forth. We do detect in live production in the US, it's more than 25,000 different device we see across nearly 50 million homes.
No, huge number. Okay. But what kind of threats are they proposing? Okay, so we've got the obvious ones, which if you've got a camera or a webcam or something, people are hacking into these kind of systems. But what are the main issues that you're concerned about at CUJO, and what do you foresee as well? Do you foresee this becoming happening even more, basically, in the future?
You can approach it from a couple of directions. It's so a botnet or attacker, like botnet is a good example of it. If you can, the bigger the botnet, the more dangerous it is. What botnets are used for, multiple phases in that, basically taking down a site or acting as a download point for malware so that the protection technology doesn't detect it, or as a stepping stone in an attack, or multiple use cases for owning a computer resource for doing something bad. And now suddenly we have so many of them, and that's one side of it. The other side of it is, it's your baby monitor. Somebody else is watching it, or it's your heat pump controller. Somebody can turn it off, or it's your sauna controller. Somebody can turn it on and do something bad. But that, I think, what they are primarily used for now is the botnet owners. They want more devices to their botnet, so they become more powerful, and they sell them. They sell that compute resource for somebody else that wants to do bad. And that's the whole ecosystem and the business model on the bad side of things, on the bad side of the business. So more devices that can be tapped on. And why? Why can they be tapped? Like IoT devices come to the market, they are launched very quickly. There's a fierce competition on all sectors, and they are released as soon as the main use cases are resolved. The big companies that are kind of the big names, they have a internal processes and governances to make sure that they launch devices that are with a good quality from the operating system upwards. Smaller companies, not necessarily so. So there are a lot of vulnerabilities to be exploited. And then as a consumers, we are lazy. If you don't have automatically updating IoT device, vulnerabilities come out and people don't update them. They don't necessarily even get a notice that they need to update them. And they are lazy. They don't update them. So we have a lot of vulnerable computers out there. And we know that we are vulnerable. We're also kind of lazy on updating our devices, those that we use daily basis, like iPhones, Androids, Windows. But Microsoft, Google, Apple have resolved this problem very nicely. They push those updates automatically. For the last decade, we've been enjoying up-to-date attended devices, but only proportion of the IoT devices can claim the same. And so thus it's a fertile ground and a good target and good source for compute resources.
Obviously, we're talking about, let's say, I use the word hackers. Yeah, hackers that are jumping into these systems, stealing the information, or basically listening to the baby monitor, whatever. With the advances of technology, do you think, say, companies like CUJO AI will be able to get so far ahead that hackers will no longer be able to do it? Or is it kind of in tandem? If technology advances, both will also advance. So the challenge will always be there.
I've been in the business for nearly 30 years on cyber security, from the first antivirus products when they started coming out on PCs. It's been an arms race ever since. Late 90s, we talked about mobile threats. Late 2000, they started becoming real. Now I think Android, from all the attended platforms, is the biggest target, or is used most for that, because it's the weakest. So the threat moves. So it's always the lowest, where the bar is lowest, and the number of devices, or so there's if you are on the kind of a dark side of the fence, you always try to find the easiest, biggest crowd, easiest to target, biggest crowd, and it tends to move, even though, and then it changes its form. Like we have seen the development of operating system, like Windows is a good example, from Windows 3.11 to what we have now. They have hardened it extremely well in comparatives to what we had like 20, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually not that easily targeted anymore, and thus it's easier to to attack IoT devices nowadays. Apple locked their ecosystem from the day one. Everybody was complaining, very wise thing to do from security perspective. So they haven't been suffering so much for this. And then, of course, human is the weakest link. Phishing still works like a charm. People still go and click and give their information out. If, like, you need that protection there, and then the techniques change all the time. And then when you have like huge number of compute resources that you can tap on as an attacker, we have to identify whether this site is a phishing site, but the site might be running in somebody's home. We indeed need to identify it's a phishing site. It's like, is this IP bad? You can't just follow that because the number of IP addresses, the whole IPv4 space is already saturated. All IPs are sold. There's so many that it's hard to get the first person using the site before you have even seen what's going on in that IP or domain. So it needs to be really looking into the pattern itself. So it's the volume of things that makes these things still work. And every time we develop a cure, there's a new technique or tactic that's been developed, because it's a big business. Also, to the cyber criminal side, it's a massive business.
Have you seen that with the tech that's been developing then, have you seen that the business cybercrime side has got even bigger? Is it only going to get bigger over the years as technology, or will it, because as you're saying, like what you're doing at CUJO AI and other companies, because they get so far ahead, will it kind of dwindle off?
No, well, it's an arms race, as I mentioned. So that's why we are here. It's been a good business to be on, to be honest, because there's all the time work to do. But on the kind of cyber crime side, it's like when you're building software, you have supply chain. You buy components, you have open source, you have different companies doing different things for you as a software or product supplier. You have a supply chain. This has, over the last 2 decades, also kind of grown as a model on the cyber criminal side. You have different players who are providing different pieces of that supply chain. You can buy many things. You can buy specific malware for specific device type. You can buy botnet. You can buy credentials. The black market is there. There are companies that are just developing ecosystems for software stacks for attacking. Some of them are connected or might have been born from governmental interests, and then because of some motivation or leak, the technology leaks, and then you can find it from used on a non-governmental interests. So yeah, let's remember that the techniques that cyber criminals use are also used by kind of a governmental players, like a military, like, well, it's not just Russia, it's not just China, it's also the Western world. It's a surveillance.
Okay, if we're at 20 at the moment, do you see in the future, is there going to be 40, 50? Is it just going to keep on growing? Or is there a limit of how many you can actually have in a house?
I think the limit is the number of devices that you plug to electricity socket.
So how many sockets you've got in your house?
No, the number of sockets you have plugged on. I think that's the limit, because light bulbs have Zigbees now. And like, it's always like, okay, if it costs now $20 and 5 years from now it costs $5, do you care anymore? You take the device which has that connectivity, and it might have costed 100 and now it's 20, so it's affordable. It's better to buy that than something that was. And everything is kind of constantly changing. So yeah, and we want to control everything from an app, right? Anyway, nowadays, if there's no app, it's kind of a old-fashioned thing, and that's what the youngsters are used to. So, and they don't shy away from that.
Hey guys, it's me again. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, be sure to press the thumbs up button below. And also, whilst you're there, hit subscribe. Otherwise, you could miss out on all of our interesting content we've got coming your way in the near future. Okay, guys, take care and see you soon.